There is a pain inside you that cannot be explained by logic. It lingers even when life seems to be in order, even when you smile and nod, even when you say, "I'm fine." You carry a weight in your chest, a silent scream that never leaves your throat. It is not because you are weak. It is not because life is unfair. It is because you are disconnected. Most people think their suffering is caused by others, by a demanding job, a distant partner, a lack of success. And yes, these things do weigh us down, but they are not the root. The root of your suffering lies in a place far deeper. It lies in the part of you that you have silenced, forgotten, betrayed. Carl Jung once said, "What you do not bring to consciousness returns as fate." This means that the parts of yourself you abandon do not disappear. They wait. They become the quiet forces shaping your decisions, influencing your emotions, writing your story behind the curtain. You were not born broken. You became lost. Lost in the roles you were taught to play, the expectations you were told to meet, the image you were asked to maintain. From an early age, you learned that being accepted meant being something you are not. Slowly, you started drifting away from who you really are. The result is inner division. You smile, but your heart is heavy. You succeed, but feel empty. You are surrounded by people, yet deeply alone. This disconnection is the true source of your pain. And until you face it, nothing will ever feel quite right. You have tried everything. Meditation, affirmations, distractions, advice from friends, and still, the suffering remains, like a shadow that refuses to leave. That is because the shadow is not trying to hurt you, it is trying to be seen. There is a truth you may have never heard before. Suffering is not punishment, it is invitation. It is life whispering, or screaming, that you are not being true to yourself. It is your soul trying to bring you home. And that is where we begin, with the first and hardest step, looking inward, not with judgment, but with curiosity, with honesty, with compassion. This is not a video, a book, or a motivational speech. It is a mirror. And if you dare to look, you will see that the source of your pain is not out there. It is in the space where you have abandoned yourself. But take heart, because what has been abandoned can also be reclaimed. And that reclamation is where healing begins. In the next chapter, we will explore the greatest lie you have ever believed, the lie that made you forget who you are. You were not born afraid. You were not born ashamed of your own voice. You were not born trying to be perfect. All of that was taught, slowly, silently, through rules that were never spoken but always understood. Be nice, be quiet, be useful, be good. And you obeyed, because that is what love seemed to demand. So you learned how to adjust. You became careful with your words. You watched the moods of others before expressing yourself. You wore different faces for different people. And every time you denied a part of yourself to fit in, something inside you faded. You called it growing up. But it was not growth. It was erasure. Carl Jung said that the most tragic thing is to live a life that is not yours. Yet, that is exactly what most people do. Not because they are weak, but because they were conditioned to survive. You learned how to be who the world needed you to be, but you forgot how to be yourself. Now you wonder why you feel numb, why joy feels distant, why even in a room full of people, you still feel alone. You think the answer lies in doing more, achieving more, being more. But the truth is, you are already too much of what you are not. Your identity has become a costume, your personality, a performance. And underneath it all, your soul waits patiently, not for you to become something new, but for you to remember what you were before the world told you who to be. This is not your fault. It is how society works. It praises masks. It rewards obedience. It teaches you that love must be earned and that your worth is conditional. You become so used to proving your value that you forget you had it all along. But the soul does not forget. It keeps record. Every forced smile, every "I'm fine" when you were not. Every time you kept quiet when your truth burned inside you. The soul keeps score. And eventually, it starts to ache. That ache is not dysfunction. It is not weakness. It is memory. It is the self trying to resurface. So ask yourself, who are you when no one is watching? Who would you be if no one expected anything of you? What would your life look like if you were not trying to prove something every day? The answers may scare you, because they will show you what you have sacrificed. They will show you the gap between your truth and your image, and that gap is the cause of your suffering. But here is the gift. If you had the power to forget yourself, then you also have the power to remember. And remembering begins now, in the stillness, in the pause between roles, in the choice to stop performing and start listening. In the next chapter, we will explore the part of you that has been hidden for too long, the shadow, the raw, repressed truth you've been afraid to face, but within it lies the very key to your healing. There are parts of yourself that you pretend do not exist, thoughts you push away, desires you judge, fears you deny. You silence them, you bury them, you build a life on top of them, but they do not go away. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the hidden self, the version of you made from everything you were told not to be. It includes the rage you repress, the envy you hide, the impulses you suppress to keep your image intact. The shadow is not evil, it is simply unseen, and what remains unseen begins to rule from the dark. You may think you are in control, but your shadow acts when you are not looking. It speaks in your defensiveness. It shows up in your jealousy. It lashes out when you are tired and makes decisions when you are scared. You sabotage your happiness not because you want to suffer, but because your shadow has learned to survive through pain. The shadow is your inner child, bruised and unheard. It is the teenager who learned that being loud meant being punished. It is the adult who smiles politely while dying inside. You were taught to hide your mess, to look strong, to be nice. But that training turned your truth into shame. And now that shame whispers, "You're too much. You're not enough. You're broken." You chase success hoping to silence it. You seek love hoping it will fix you. But nothing fixes what you won't face. The shadow doesn't want to hurt you. It wants to be known. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So you live thinking, "Why does this always happen to me?" But maybe it is not happening to you. Maybe it is happening through you. And maybe that means healing doesn't begin with light. It begins with the descent into the dark. Not to stay there, but to retrieve what you've left behind. The moment you name what you fear, the moment you say out loud what you've spent years hiding, that is the moment the shadow loses its grip. And you begin to remember that even your darkest parts want the same thing: to be seen, to be loved, to be free. In the next chapter, we will learn how to face this shadow without fear, not to conquer it, but to integrate it, Because healing is not about changing who you are. It is about reclaiming what you were told to abandon. Understanding your pain is not the same as healing it. You can name your shadow. You can talk about your wounds. You can recite every quote by Jung. But unless you descend, truly descend, you will remain on the surface of your own life. The descent is not poetic. It is not comfortable. It is not something you can do while multitasking. The descent demands presence. It asks you to stop running, to stop performing, to stop pretending. Carl Jung said, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." And that is exactly what this is. A journey into your personal underworld. It starts when you finally get quiet, when you stop numbing the discomfort, when you sit with the ache instead of escaping it. At first, it feels like nothing but pain. But if you stay, truly stay, something begins to shift. You start to see patterns you never questioned. The way you people please to avoid rejection. The way you chase chaos because peace feels unfamiliar. The way you cling to control because surrender once meant harm. And beneath all of this, you see something softer. The version of you that still believes they are unworthy. The one who still thinks love must be earned. The child who learned that being themselves was not safe. This is where the descent brings you, to the original wound. And here's the truth. No one tells you. Healing is not about fixing that child. It is about returning to them, sitting beside them, holding their hand and saying, "You don't have to hide anymore." It is not about eliminating the pain. It is about finally listening to it. Because once you do, it starts to change shape. It becomes less of a monster and more of a messenger. The descent is terrifying, yes, but it is also sacred. Because this is where you meet your true self. Not the curated one, not the one built to impress, but the raw, trembling soul who has waited for you in silence. You do not need to be fearless. You only need to be willing. To go down, to sit in the dark, to wait, to feel, to be. In the next chapter, we will explore how to rise again. Not as someone new, but as someone real, someone whole, someone who has walked through their own night and come out carrying light. Something shifts when you stop fighting yourself. It is not dramatic, not loud, but you feel it. Like the first breath after drowning, like the first light after a long night. This is not the rise of someone new. It is the return of someone ancient, someone real. You begin to walk differently, not with arrogance, but with presence. You no longer rush to fill silence. You no longer chase people who misunderstand your worth. You no longer shrink to fit into spaces that once made you feel safe. Carl Jung called this process individuation, not the creation of a perfect person, but the integration of a whole one. This is what it means to be whole, to carry your strength and your softness, to speak your truth without apology, to walk into a room without needing approval. You do not become invincible. You become visible to yourself. You start noticing who nourishes your soul and who drains it. You start setting boundaries, not to push people away, but to protect your peace. You start saying no, clearly, firmly, without guilt. And you say yes, to rest, to joy, to authenticity. You are not healed in the way people expect. You still have scars. You still have moments of doubt. But the difference is, you no longer abandon yourself in those moments. Your relationship with pain changes. You stop fearing it. You start learning from it. You see pain not as punishment, but as passage. Now, when the old voices whisper, "You're not enough. You'll fail again. You're too much," you recognize them. You smile softly and you respond, "That is not my voice anymore. You no longer live by survival. You live by intuition. There is a new kind of stillness in you, not because life is easier, but because you are no longer at war with yourself. And that peace, that inner silence, becomes magnetic. You begin to draw in people who see the real you, not the image, not the mask, but the soul that has returned from the fire, carrying wisdom, carrying light. You do not rise by becoming someone else. You rise by becoming yourself, fully, finally, unapologetically. In the next chapter, we will talk about what it means to live from this place, to walk through the world as someone who has met themselves and can now meet life with open eyes and an open heart. Waking up is not the end. It is the beginning of everything. When you return to yourself, when you no longer lie to your heart, when the masks fall away, something sacred begins. But it is not easy, because awareness is not comfort, it is clarity. And clarity comes with weight. You start to see what you used to ignore, the way people speak but never listen, the way the world rewards performance over presence, the way most conversations are defenses in disguise, and you no longer want to participate. But that means loss. You lose what once distracted you. You lose connections that were built on your silence. You lose roles that made you feel useful but hollow. And now, in their place, space, stillness, and a strange loneliness, because not everyone is ready to meet you here. Not everyone wants the truth. Some prefer you the way you were, agreeable, predictable, unavailable to yourself. Carl Jung warned that individuation requires the courage to walk alone, not forever, but long enough to know that your worth does not depend on the crowd. You will be misunderstood. You will be called distant. You will be told you've changed. But they do not understand you didn't change. You returned to your values, your needs, your voice. And yes, that changes everything. Living awake means you cannot unsee what you've seen. You cannot go back to sleep. You cannot pretend anymore. You see through manipulation. You feel dishonesty. You sense when someone wants your energy but not your truth. And you say no, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. There is grief in this chapter. Grief for who you used to be. Grief for what you tolerated. Grief for the time you lost in silence. But there is also a quiet power. You stop explaining your worth. You stop asking for permission to be. You stop sacrificing yourself for comfort. And you start creating a life from the inside out, not based on roles, but on resonance, not on appearances, but on truth. This chapter is heavy, but it is also necessary, because without the weight of truth, there is no freedom. In the next chapter, the final one, we will explore what it means to live not just healed, but alive. Not just aware, but deeply present. Not just whole, but free. Freedom is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of truth. When you've walked through your shadow, when you've held your pain without flinching, when you've faced yourself fully, you emerge not as someone healed, but as someone real. And now the question is no longer, how do I survive? It becomes, how do I live? Not live to impress, not live to prove, but live truly, deeply, fully. Carl Jung believed that wholeness was not a destination. It was a way of being. It was a relationship with life where nothing is denied, not joy, not sadness, not fear, not beauty. Everything belongs. To live free is to say, I do not need to be perfect to be present. I do not need to be understood to be real. I do not need to be loved to love myself. Freedom is quiet. It does not need applause. It moves through the world with light steps. It laughs more. It forgives quicker. It lets go without burning bridges. To live free is to tell the truth, even when it shakes your voice, even when it costs you something, even when no one else agrees. You stop settling for half connections. You stop giving your time to people who only want access, not intimacy. You stop betraying yourself for temporary comfort, and instead you build something honest, a life that fits your soul, even if it doesn't fit the script. You work not to be important, but to be in integrity. You speak not to be heard, but to be clear. You rest without guilt. You say no without explanation. You walk away without resentment. This is the art of living free. You still get hurt. You still lose people. You still have days where the old voices echo. But now you listen with compassion. And then you move forward, not hardened, but softened. Not bitter, but clear. Not guarded, but grounded. Because freedom isn't found. It's remembered. It was always in you, waiting beneath the noise, beneath the masks, beneath the stories. Now, you are ready. Not to start a new life, but to live the one that was always yours. Carl Jung believed that wholeness was not a destination. It was a way of being. It was a relationship with life where nothing is denied. Not joy, not sadness, not fear, not beauty. Everything belongs. To live free is to say, I do not need to be perfect to be present. I do not need to be understood to be real. I do not need to be loved to love myself. Freedom is quiet. It does not need applause. It moves through the world with light steps. It laughs more. It forgives quicker. It lets go without burning bridges. To live free is to tell the truth, even when it shakes your voice, even when it costs you something, even when no one else agrees. You stop settling for half connections. You stop giving your time to people who only want access, not intimacy. You stop betraying yourself for temporary comfort, and instead you build something honest, a life that fits your soul, even if it doesn't fit the script. You work not to be important, but to be in integrity. You speak not to be heard, but to be clear. You rest without guilt. You say no without explanation. You walk away without resentment. This is the art of living free. You still get hurt. You still lose people. You still have days where the old voices echo. But now you listen with compassion. And then you move forward, not hardened, but softened. Not bitter, but clear. Not guarded, but grounded. Because freedom isn't found. It's remembered. It was always in you, waiting beneath the noise, beneath the masks, beneath the stories. Now, you are ready, not to start a new life, but to live the one that was always yours.